All right. Well, I'm really excited today to have debut author Amanda Wen as my guest. Hi, Amanda.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Welcome. I'm so glad to have you. And I know this is a huge time for you with the launch of your book, February 2nd,
Uh-huh.
the launch date, and you've got a lot going on. So I just really want to thank you first for spending some time with me today and sharing about yourself and your book. So we're going to jump into it so you can have as much time as possible
Okay.
to share.
Well,
So
thank you for having me.
go ahead and introduce yourself and just tell a little bit about your family if you want to, where you live.
Okay, sure. I'm Amanda Wen. I'm a native of Wichita, Kansas. I've lived other places, and then I came back after I got married and had my first baby, who is now 12. I have three kids. I've got the 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and those are boys, and then I have an 8-year-old daughter. And I'm married to an acupuncturist, which
Oh,
is, yeah, it's super fun.
I've never known an acupuncturist.
Yeah,
That's hard to say.
it is. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. Well, let's go ahead and jump on in. I know that people who are watching this interview want to know about your book and the story behind it and all that. So let's go ahead and jump into that. And first of all, I want to know what drew you to write in the split time genre. I know that can be challenging, right? So tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that.
Yeah, when I floated the idea to my agent, she said, you realize it's basically just writing two books and then putting them into a single book, and you only get paid for one, even though you write two. And I was like, okay, well, I still like, I've always been drawn to things that deal with multiple historical eras. There was an old Hallmark movie back in the 90s, and it was called, oh, I am blanking. I think The Love Letter, maybe. And it had dual timelines, like before that was even really a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a police procedural on CBS for a while called Cold Case, and it investigated old murders. And every week there was a different historical era. And so, like, some of the scenes of the show would be in the here and now with the detectives, and then the others would be in the past with the victim and the suspects. And you would kind of see the things that led up to the crime unfold. And they were fantastic with costumes and music and everything. And so I think I've just always been drawn to that. I like reading contemporary and I like reading historical. And I just like anything that kind of combines those two. So I didn't really know split time was a genre until I think it was Heidi Cheveroli's books that kind of introduced me to, oh, this is a thing that can happen with books. And so then I decided, well, since I love contemporary and historical, I'll try writing my own.
Yeah, well, from what I've read so far, you've done a great job.
Oh, thank you.
So tell a little bit about how the historical story connects with the contemporary story and roots of Wood and Stone.
Okay, well, they both, the story kind of revolves around this 1890s farmhouse that one of the contemporary characters' grandmother lives in. And through the course of the book, you kind of learn the history of the house and the people who have lived in it. And some of the past characters have a connection to the house as well. So it really just revolves around this farmhouse.
Yeah, cool. So I understand this story was inspired by your own family history.
It was, yeah.
About that?
The farmhouse that inspired the book is a real one that is just a couple miles from my house now. And since I grew up in this part of Wichita, like, my mom's a genealogist, so she has studied our family for probably longer than I've been alive. And so I have grown up just with this backdrop of, this is where we come from, this is who we are. And I've always had an appreciation for what my mom has been able to learn about our family. I didn't always love spending childhood vacations tracking down ancestors and like spending time in small town libraries and walking around in cemeteries and like places I'd never heard of. But now that I'm older, I can oh, this is really cool that I know this stuff. I think it helps kind of ground you and give you a sense of just more who you are and everything. So anyway, I grew up knowing that this old white farmhouse up by the highway belonged to my ancestors. And I remember they sold the land a few years ago. And I was like, I really wish that I had the means to buy that house and restore it and, have somebody live in it. Cause I'm not a DIY person at all. And this house has not been lived in for probably 20 years.
Wow.
It's still there, but I know it's probably not going to be for too much longer. But anyway, we'd drive by it occasionally. My mom would be like, that's Grandpa Little's house. And that Grandpa Little is my great-great-grandfather, Francis Little, who immigrated from Ireland in 1861 and ended up in Sedgwick County. So, and he and his father-in-law are both on a monument in the cemetery in the town of Mays, which is where my kids go to school now.
Wow.
And as being early settlers of the Mays area. So
That's
my
awesome.
family has pretty deep roots in this part of Wichita. And I think it's kind of crazy that, like, after I lived in 2 other states, I came back and we're living here. And that's where my kids go to school. Like, my great-great-grandpa wrote a memoir that was really helpful when I was researching for the book. And he mentions a doctor that was one of the first pioneer doctors in Mays. And that doctor, my kid's elementary school is named after him, which I think is super cool.
Yeah. So did that influence the doctor in your book?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I'm trying to think. That must have been why I decided to make Uncle Stephen a doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah, Stephen and Catherine in the book, they are also inspired by real ancestors on my dad's side. The Littles are my mom's ancestors, and then my dad had I think it's his great grandmother maybe, that she was raised by an aunt and uncle named Stephen and Catherine. So that's where I got those names.
Yeah, so that's awesome. Such rich history. And I love now because I'm reading the book. I got my copy and I'm reading. And so to hear, from you firsthand how these characters were formed and, based on real people, I love that so much.
Oh, cool. I'm
So-
rereading the book myself. It's been a while since I read it, and I hadn't, I don't know, I'd heard from some authors that once it's in print, they don't read it because they're afraid they'll find a typo or something. And I was kind of afraid of that too, but then I was like, but I've only ever seen this story as a document on my computer. I would like to read it as a book.
Yeah,
And I
hold that in your hand.
Yeah.
Read that.
And I'm about the same spot, I think, in my reread as you are with your bookmark. Looks like it's in about the same spot as mine is. So I'm discovering
100 pages in, I think. Something.
Yeah,
like
I think that's about where I am. So I'll try not to do any spoilers, but it's been fun reading it as a book. I've discovered that now that it's in book form, I'm able to shut off my critical writer brain and just be like, hey, I'm reading a book that I know really, really, really well.
That's right. So one of the main characters, Sloane, in the story, she's abandoned at birth. So she didn't have any connection to a biological family. She didn't know their history. So how does that play in her professional life? This is the contemporary part of the story.
Yeah. She's kind of an interesting character because she had a good childhood. She has adoptive parents who are very, they're kind and loving and they love her very much. But she has never felt like she's fit in with them at all. They look different than she does. They come from kind of they're just different. She's always kind of felt like she was a substitute for the child that they really wanted and couldn't have. She's always felt like this specter of, well, this is the ideal child that we could have had ourselves, but we couldn't do that. So now you're sort of this plan B. And that's kind of, she feels like plan B. That's kind of her identity, is I'm the person that nobody plans for and doesn't know what to do with when they show up. And so she likes to know facts. She's a researcher. And the fact that she does not know so much about her own background that's a big hole. And so she's kind of seeking to fill it with local history. And, if I can't answer my own questions, at least I can help other people appreciate their past and their history.
Right. So what about Garrett? Tell me about him and his character. He
is, I think, probably the one in the book who's the most like me. He's kind of a control freak. And he is a planner. He's a financial planner. That's his career, which I'm numbers, whatever. I'm not that person, but planning is what he does with his life, and it's what he does with his job. And I am a scheduler. I've got a big fat planner, and I like to know what's going to happen in advance. So the last year has been a little bit challenging for
that type
people like me. So Garrett, and I wrote this book obviously before anything with the pandemic hit at all. I had no idea. So then, I'm writing the book and I'm revising, and I'm seeing people shaking hands and going to restaurants and doing all these normal things. And I'm like, is this even gonna be like a thing people want to read anymore?
Right.
But anyway, Garrett, he just has a plan for everything, and that's kind of his. He says at one point in the book, like, I have to have a plan or everything falls apart. He kind of has the weight of the world on his shoulders right now because his mom is gone. His dad has remarried and moved away. So basically, his parents are not in the picture, and his mom's parents are the grandparents that live in the farmhouse. And his grandfather has recently died, and his grandmother has Alzheimer's. And as long as grandpa was around, he was good to take care of grandma. But then with him gone, Garrett is like, it's not safe for grandma to live by herself anymore. But Garrett has a sister, Lauren, who says, no, she should stay in her home. And Lauren has moved in to help take care of her. And Garrett is just able to see that this is not sustainable. It'll work for a while, but there's going to come a point in time when it won't. And then he has to have a plan for that time. So he's researching care facilities and things like that.
Right.
And he's got this plan where, grandma needs money. She needs to move out of her house. Let's sell the house, pay for the care with the money we get from the house. And it's the great plan, but nobody else seems to want to go along with it. So yeah.
That's not going to go over well, right?
No.
Several people. So what about the historical characters? Do they carry missing pieces of their family?
They do. My past heroine is Annabelle, and we first meet her when she's 9 years old. Her mother has just died, and her father, this is 1861 when we meet her, and her father and her two older brothers have decided that they're going to go fight for the Union in the Civil War. So we have this 9-year-old little girl who doesn't have anyone to take care of her. So Annabelle's father drops her off with her aunt and uncle that I talked about previously. And that's another true story from my family. My dad's great-great-grandmother was raised by the aunt and uncle after her dad dropped her off after her mom died. So I know that kind of thing was pretty common in those days. And I just can't imagine like having been raised by some people until you're 9 and then like, okay, this is your family now. And like, I don't know how that would have affected a child. Like, would it being normal or a commonly done thing, like, would that have made it hurt less? I don't know. So Annabelle, like, as she grows up, we see her kind of grow up in the book. And she, even as an adult, she's still, she loves her aunt and uncle very much. And she's fine with how things turned out, but she still misses her dad. And she's still hurt by the fact that she hasn't seen him and that he just kind of left her to go off on his adventures.
Right. So how does faith play into your characters in your story?
That's a good question. They're all people of faith. I think for the contemporary people, I think Sloane's art kind of deals with identity. And, she has this big hole of she doesn't know who she is or where she comes from. And she has kind of, she's tried to fill that hole with other things. But she is going to try to learn through the course of the book that God can supply what she is needing. And Garrett has to learn to trust God for like a different reason. His plans, he thinks he's got everything figured out, but what he doesn't yet realize is that God's plans are better than his. And that's a lesson that I've had to learn a lot, and I'm still working on learning it. As far as the past characters, I think similar to Sloane, Annabelle has got some holes that she tries to fill with various people, mostly people, not necessarily things, but just relationships and people. And throughout the course of the book, she is kind of forced to learn that God is all she truly needs. And then we have a past hero, Jack, who when we meet him, he has been dealt some pretty devastating blows. And he's really kind of wondering, is God even real? If he is, like, is he truly a good and loving God? And if he is, then why am I going through the things that I'm going through?
Yeah, very relatable for sure with those arcs of the character, because so many of us go through that same thing.
Yeah, I know I have.
You talk about lessons, for the characters. Well, what did God teach you through the
This
writing of
was
the book?
another exercise in trust. And now as I kind of look back on like all the things that led to getting this book published, all of the doors that God had to open, and like all of the things that had to line up perfectly for this to even happen. It's like I know it was him,
Mhm.
and he has been guiding me the whole entire time. Like I met my editor on Twitter. Like before I even knew she was an editor, we were introduced by a mutual writer friend, and we got started talking, and her daughter was having some medical issues at the time, and so I was praying for her daughter. And it was months before our mutual friend said, she's an editor for Kriegel, right? And I was like, no. Somehow I didn't make that connection. And our friend said, oh yeah, she's the one that decides books that she wants to take to committee. And so then I'm like scrolling back through our conversations, making sure I didn't say anything dumb, which I didn't. But like I requested to pitch to her at ACFW in 2018. And, I was like super freaked out about the pitch session, as most authors are. And then I meet her and she says, yeah, I'm 3/4 of the way through your book. I read it on the plane. I love it. And I'm like, so I don't really have to give you this little elevator pitch? And she says, nope, we're good.
Wow.
So yeah, just little things like that. So I guess that's more like what he taught me through the process rather than the story itself. But now that I am rereading the story, now that we're stuck in this pandemic where we can't control much,
Yeah.
and every day is different and we can't plan for everything. It's like, okay, I needed this story when I was writing it, but I need it in a different way now. So I'm kind of hoping that people just that the story will encourage people to trust God's plan even when it doesn't make sense.
So which character in Roots of Wood and Stone was the easiest to write, and why is that?
Jack was the easiest. He is just, sometimes you have a character that just kind of pops into your head fully formed and just like, this is me, this is who I am. He is partially inspired by the character Jack Pearson on This Is Us. That's where I got his first name. And that's kind of who I see him as. But of course, they have completely different backstories and everything. But I think having seen a version of him kind of on TV and then like, changing the details, but having elements of that character present that made him very easy to write. And he's just one of those characters that kind of takes over every scene that he's in a really good way.
Yeah,
So,
I love him so far.
oh, good.
Yeah. Well, I love them all, actually.
Well, thank you.
So which character presented the biggest challenge for you?
Sloan was she's a tough nut to crack because she doesn't trust easily. And like, I envy those writers that are plotters, like that they just plot out every element of their story before they even start writing, and they have this outline, and then when it comes time to like actually write, they can just throw down insane amounts of words and write a whole book in like a month.
Yeah.
I have tried doing that.
Too. It does not work.
Nope, I'm a pantser. So like, I kind of have a vague idea of what kind of okay, this is kind of the main element, and it's this character type. Like, okay, so we have this character type. Let's kind of pair them with somebody who's their opposite or something. I have germs of ideas, but not real detailed things. So then when I don't get to know my characters really until I start writing them. But Sloan isn't the kind of person that's going to open up to someone she doesn't know. So we kind of spun our wheels for about 3 chapters. And I think it's like chapter 4 or 5 where I said, okay, I'm not getting anywhere with this girl. I need to give her and me something in common. And I'm a professional musician. That's what my college degrees are in. And that is my day job. And I said, okay, well, congrats, Sloan. You're a musician now. You have a musical hobby. Maybe that'll give us some common ground. And it was a total desperation move, but it worked. And at that point I was like, oh, okay, we've got common ground. She'll talk to me now.
And don't you find it odd that your personality is a planner, that you want to plan everything out, but you that way?
Yeah, I've often wished that I could be. It seems like I would be, but when I'm in creative mode, I really am just I want to know what happens in the story. And so that kind of motivates me to keep writing.
Yeah. So you mentioned you are a professional musician. So
Uh-huh.
how do you balance that with your writing life? And what made you start writing when you had, I assume you had music
Uh-huh.
going on at that time?
Yeah, I actually have made up stories pretty much my whole life. Like even before I started playing piano when I was 5 and cello when I was 9, but I was doing the story thing even before those two things. And school kind of, going through public school and high school and college and writing papers and all that kind of like writing wasn't as fun at that point. But it was probably about 13 years ago that I had an idea for a story. Just like I had a dream or something. I dreamed a scene and I was like, this is really cool. I wonder what would happen if, and I didn't know how to finish it. So I just sort of sat down at the computer and started writing, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I told myself the story. And then my husband, he was in acupuncture school at that point, and he had been gone for the weekend. He was commuting to Chicago. We were living a couple hours south of Chicago at the time, and he would spend 2 or 3 days a week in Chicago. And he came home that night and I was still in my pajamas at the computer. We had no kids at that point. And he was like, what have you been doing all day? And I'm like, writing a story. And he's like, oh, is that a thing you do? And I'm like, I guess. But so it's always been part of me. And it's one of those things that I can't not do it.
Mhm.
So, and music is the same way. I have my degrees are in cello performance, and I play piano for a local high school and middle school choir. So that's kind of my day job, is the choir thing. And then I freelance cello. I teach cello lessons, and I play with the symphony sometimes, and I play a lot of weddings, and I play with church. And so I'm playing a lot, and I can't not do that either. Music and writing are both just things that God has wired so deep into my DNA. And I'm really glad that He has given me opportunities to do all of it. But that does make for some crazy busy scheduling. So I guess you asked about balance. And I think especially women and moms, we're like encouraged, oh, balance, and everything has to be balanced. And I read something wise, and I wish I could quote it, because we think of balance as like having just equal proportions of every ingredient. But when you are balancing on like a balance beam, sometimes you kind of veer this way so that you can catch yourself, and then you kind of go another way. And so you're not always just centered. It's constant adjustments. And so like when music stuff is super busy, the writing kind of takes a back seat. And then when I'm on deadline with a book, I don't take on as many music things. I have learned the fine art of saying no. I have learned to prioritize. And then, sometimes I just take a week and unplug from everything and spend time with my Wenlets.
Yes, I know. I learned that too as a pastor's wife in ministry and everything. When you talk about balance, like sometimes ministry is just your go, 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 and there's a lot going on in a season, and other times it's not as much. And so, yeah, I understand that balance thing completely.
Good.
So your book, Roots of Wood and Stone, it's the Sedgwick County Chronicles.
Yes.
So Chronicles means, can we expect book 2?
Yes, I'm hoping so. Book 2 is in the works, and I will be submitting it to Kriegel for their committee to review it, hopefully as soon as I get done with it.
So how many in the series are you planning?
I pitched 3 books to them. So, and we're kind of going on like a book by book basis with them, since I'm a debut author, which is totally fine. So yeah, my plan is for it to be a 3-book series.
Yeah. Well, congratulations again.
Thank you.
And thank you for spending this time. And I'm really looking forward to digging into the book more and actually finishing it and writing an amazing review.
Oh, thank you.
For you on Amazon and Goodreads and other book platforms. And I'm going to encourage all of those who are watching to go out and to get your copy of Roots of Wood and Stone by debut author Amanda Wen. And please write reviews. Reviews for authors are like gold, right?
Yes, they are.
So thanks so much for spending time with us.
Thank you.